Hey guys, Baseplay 12, or Mitch as you guys know me. Today's video, what I want to do is give you some insight of what it was like to teach a whole school year virtually online and three things that I learned after teaching a whole year of online learning. And so I'm not here today to kind of tell you, hey, this one was better or this one's better. That's not my purpose. It's just to kind of give you some insight on what I wrote down as some notes as some three most important things that I took away from this year.
Base Play 12.
So, number one, what I learned was that some students actually flourished with online learning. And so, what I did was, after a while, I kind of gauged how students were doing and I wrote down and listened to their responses. And some students were actually, they were more comfortable online. I break down my students, and there's so many different categories, but you have your extroverts that just were having the hardest time with online learning because they wanted to be social, they wanted to interact with people. And then I had my introverts, the ones that I just want to be kept to myself. I don't necessarily need to talk to anybody. I don't need to socialize. I don't need to, collaborate with anybody. And then you always have your students that are somewhere in between. They might be a little mix of both. But my definite introverts seem to just gravitate towards online learning. Um, they were more comfortable asking me questions digitally rather than in person. They felt a little bit more at ease doing things by themselves. They didn't have anybody to rely on. They didn't have anybody to bounce their ideas off of. And so when I was looking at their comments, I asked some students, I said, after the whole year, what if you found out that next year had to be completely online? And some students were like, yeah, I could do that, with almost some eagerness. Now, I had to take that with a grain of salt, thinking, wait a second, did they just want to wake up later, be able to have just less hours of school? Because that's what happened with virtual online learning is we didn't start the normal time that we would have. I mean, obviously they didn't have to get dressed, they didn't have to shower or get driven to school. So obviously they could sleep in longer. And then we got out at around 12 every day. So it was almost like a minimum day every day. So that's when I started to think, are they just eager to, possibly do the same thing next year because of those things? But some students actually said, I did better. I was able to complete the work. I was able to not have to talk to people and socialize and interact. And I was like, wow, interesting. And then you obviously had those students who were definitely hurting. They suffered because they weren't able to see students, they weren't able to interact. And so I definitely had both worlds going on. And then I had obviously some students that could have gone either way. But definitely the ones that wanted to be at school, you felt the toughest for because they were the ones that struggled the most. But so number one, there were some students that actually preferred it, and not necessarily because of all of the extra benefits of not having to come to school, getting dressed. It was they just were able to be by themselves, and they only had themselves to think about and worry about. There was no social anxiety. They were just able to be themselves and not have to interact with anybody. The second thing I learned is students will do almost anything and figure out anything around anything. And so here's how it worked with our online learning is students would obviously log on to the Meet, and you saw their name pop up. You get evidence that Johnny checked in at 8:29. And so there were a lot of ways to prove that the student checked in, but there were not a lot of ways to prove that the student was actually participating in the work. So obviously you can look at the grades and things that students turned in, and you were able to see, hey, how's Johnny doing? And you can see, okay, out of 15 projects, he turned in two. And so you can kind of in your mind go, okay, what is he doing? But when you look at it and figure out, okay, if they are checking in, and obviously you can ask, and I did say sometimes, I'm just checking in with Johnny. Hey, Johnny, how things going? And there would just be you know, 20 seconds of silence, and sometimes you would never get a response. And, you know, your mind starts to wander like, what's going on here? Now, we did not, you know, force our students to be on their camera. And, you know, looking back at it, I could kind of see why. Because, you know, with everything just starting where everything was unfamiliar, making them be on their camera just opened up so many other problems that you might have with attendance and parents and things like that. So, what students then figured out is if I don't have to be on my camera, then nobody knows what I'm doing. So, there was just a laundry list of things that I was thinking about. You know, they could have checked in and went back to sleep. They could have checked in and been on their phone or their computer. They could have been outside playing. Who knows what they were doing? And so my evidence of that was when the meet was over, you know, you always get to see who's still there. And sometimes I'd have 5, 6 students still there. When we were getting towards the end of the year, a dozen students were just still there, like didn't click off. They didn't know the class was over. And so that's when my mind was thinking, oh, they're probably in the middle of a video game level and they didn't have time or didn't hear me. And so that's why they didn't click off. Maybe they're sleeping and didn't click off. And so there's a million things that the students could have been doing while they were supposed to be participating. And obviously the grades show that they weren't participating, but we'll never know exactly how many people were sleeping, eating, playing video games on their phone, listening to music, and who knows what. And so the third thing that I finally came to the conclusion with a whole year of online learning was that if you take the whole thing and kind of put it together, it just shows that students that are real motivated, like self-motivated, they're going to always flourish. And the ones that, you know, depend on adults to motivate them, if it's in an online environment, they're going to have a tough time and they're going to struggle, because the just the accountability was not there. You know, so I had students that were just doing really poorly, and I would not get any messages from parents. I would send out messages saying, "Hey, Johnny's not doing really good," and I would get nothing back. And so it's any wonder that Johnny didn't improve, because if I'm not getting any kind of response, then, you know, what's Johnny going to do about it? Probably nothing. Now, I'm not going to say that I got no responses. I did get responses. Parents were supportive, like, I'm going to get my son or daughter on this right away. But the majority of the parents that I sent messages home saying, hey, they're missing 10 assignments. Hey, they're still, you know, when we get to the end of the meet, they're still on. I'm wondering what's happening. Those did not decrease very much, and the outlook did not get much better. And so I'm thinking, okay, mom or dad was too busy. They weren't at home. And, you know, I would just normally sometimes throw that out like, hey, Johnny, is your mom or dad home? And sometimes they'd say yes, sometimes they'd say no. And so if mom or dad's not home, I can see the accountability of, well, if nobody's home, then why should I do what I'm supposed to do? And, you know, if the grades were any type of reflection, I don't think there was any kickback from that. Like, hey, why are you not passing this class? So if, again, anything that's just wrapped up in this online learning, I think if push comes to shove, if students are not being held accountable at home, then we're sunk as teachers. We're just not going to get much turned in because, hey, I was getting comments from my students like, well, we still feel like it's not really a real school year. You know, like I heard one student say, it feels like a scrimmage. And that sent off a lot of red flags in my mind because, you know, those of you that play sports, a scrimmage doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? And so if the students were thinking, hey, this is not really real, even though we told them it was real, even though they knew they were going to get real grades, a lot of them just went, I'm not doing it. And so it's a communication thing that I felt we did as a school and a school district to communicate, hey, these are real grades, these are real projects, this is a real school year. But when it came down to it, a lot of students did not prove it was real. And I get it if they're at home and mom or dad's not enforcing anything, and especially if it's just mom or just dad or grandma, and if things are not being enforced and if other things were more important, then we're going to get the year that we did, where there was very little success and a lot of, I don't care about this, I'm not doing it. And so at the moment, I'm real happy that the next school year is going to be in person, where students now should be held accountable, and there's not going to be any video games or phones that are 10 feet away from them at home, if you guys know what I mean. So wrapping it all up, you know, I tell my students, you know, you just made it through a really difficult year, whether they enjoyed it or not. I know some of them were enjoying it, sleeping in bed. But I did say to them, you know what? I don't care about your grade, as far as I just appreciate the fact that you guys gave effort, you know, despite not knowing what their situation was, they made an effort to show up at least. Some of them did get some of the work done, but I don't know. I can't put 100% of the blame on them if I don't know what their situation was. I know one student said he had to help out the family with work, like the family business, because of the pandemic. So, you know, I had to stop myself and say, hey, don't be quick to judge, because I don't know every student's situation. But that one situation made me go, okay, I'm not going to sit here and be the judge and start pointing fingers. My job was just to be here to be supportive and say, I've, you know, notified parents about the situation, but, you know, if their understanding of the situation is that that person helps out the family with the business, then I did my job, and I gave myself as support, saying if I can do anything to help, I did my job, and I was happy with the fact that I did everything I could. So, okay, guys, so that wrapped up the year of online learning and what I learned. If you guys have anything you want to, you know, throw in the comments that you might want to add to this list, I'd love to hear it. I appreciate you guys for watching and listening. I am BasePlay12, or Mitch as you guys know me. I'll see you in tomorrow's base cover.